Our Bible word is Acts 24 verse 16. This being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense toward God and men. So this is the Apostle Paul. He's giving his defense in front of the Procurator Felix, because the Jews brought accusations against him. And this is now Paul, and in the story of Acts, this is after Paul went on his missionary journeys. And on his last missionary journey, he was also in Corinth, and he wrote this letter to the Romans from there also. And at the end of the letter, he mentioned there also, please pray for me, remember me, because I'm going to Jerusalem, and I don't know what to expect when I arrive there. And also if you read the narrative in Acts, there's these repeated warnings that are coming to Apostle Paul, telling him, if you go to Jerusalem, they're going to arrest you. But despite these repeated warnings, Paul says, no, I must go to Jerusalem. Because Paul, he had this big project, this collection of money for the poor in Jerusalem that he worked so hard at. And people accompanied him back to Jerusalem to bring this offering or this money for help for the poor Christians in Jerusalem. Now, Luke doesn't tell us much about it. Actually, he doesn't mention at all what happened. Were they happy to receive it? Maybe they were, maybe they were not. But the main thing is, when he arrived there, he tells them about his missionary work amongst the Gentiles, and then they complain to him. They say, well, you see how many believers there are here in Jerusalem, and they still observe the law. But we hear all these things about you, Paul, that you must say people must not observe the customs of Moses and circumcise their sons, etc. And you must now prove that these are not true, that you're still a faithful Jew. And they encourage him to take a Nazirite vow, to join others, and also to bear their expenses. And that's the Nazirite vow takes 7 days to fulfill. You must abstain from products of the vine, that's grapes and wine, etc. And at the end of it, you must also shave your head, whatever. And on the last day, you must also bring a sacrifice to the temple. So they say to Paul, do this to prove these people wrong, that you are still a faithful Jew. Of course, Paul wasn't a faithful Jew, because for him, observing the law was not so much of an issue anymore. But he said, okay, I will do this. And we must also remember, this is the year AD 57, when Paul now returned to Jerusalem. The year was AD 57, and it was the worst time for somebody like Paul to go to Jerusalem. Because at this time, there was a very high degree of nationalism. People rebelled more and more against the Romans. There were the 𝐸zzicarii, or the dagger men. They performed more and more assassins on Jews who cooperated with Roman rule. So this was this resentment of foreigners, of Gentiles, and foreign occupation. And here are the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. I mean, the other people were very strict in their observance. They would have looked at them also and say, are you with us or are you against us? Because they were also associated with a movement where Jews were eating with Gentiles, who were not so much observing the laws anymore, especially Paul. Paul really brought trouble for the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem because of his behavior. And so there were many in Jerusalem who would have looked at the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, saying, are you flirting with the Gentiles? Are you part of the enemy? Or are you with us in resisting this foreign domination that we want to get rid of? And this was the kind of situation that Paul entered in AD 57, a time of high, feverish nationalism. People were tired of the Romans, and because also the Procurator at this time, Felix, he especially made it his purpose to go after rebellious groups and to kill their leaders and to kill their followers. So he is very unpopular, and he helped to generate this hostility to Roman occupation even more and more. So now here is Paul. They've encouraged him, take this Nazirite vow, pay for these other people, show that you yourself, you're still an observant Jew. So that's what he did. Now let's go to Acts 21 verses 27 and 28. That is now at the end of this Nazirite vow. It says there, now when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help! This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law, and this place. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. You must understand there was this wall where beyond Jews or Gentiles could not enter. They were the inner courts of the temple. Only for Jews could go there. But this was a false accusation that he brought a Gentile into these exclusive courts. That was a false accusation. But there was also a true accusation that he teaches men everywhere to abandon the law, etc. Because he himself, he didn't see law observance as a fundamental issue anymore. If you wanted to do it, okay, you Jews. It's okay as long as it doesn't put up a barrier between you and the Gentiles. And if you don't want to observe it anymore, that's also okay. That's actually me, because the law is no longer relevant. Especially the ritual aspects of the law were no longer relevant. So that was a true accusation. So Paul was probably here in front of the altar in this part of the temple. This is where they've gotten hold of him. And they dragged him out of there and they started beating him. And the Roman troops who were stationed nearby there in the Antonia fortress, they heard it, so they came out and they rescued Paul. And they had to carry him there too. They probably took him there to the Antonia fortress that was reached by a few stairs. So Paul also, his life was saved because people wanted to kill him. Because that's in the spirit of Phinehas. If we go to Numbers 25, there was this man who brought a Moabite woman into his tent. And there was Phinehas who saw this. It disgusted him because this man broke God's law. He brought a foreigner into his tent and he drove a spear through both of them. And that kind of zeal was respected in Judaism. This kind of zeal, even you could make use of violence. And that was Paul. Before he was converted, he also had the zeal of Phinehas in him to persecute the first Christians, to bring them to prison, to have them beaten, etc. That was Paul, also before his conversion. And now he's the victim of what he was before. So they took him off to the Antonia fortress. And there were some Jews who, in the spirit of Phinehas, they plotted. They said, we're not going to eat or whatever until we kill him, until we put him to death. Because he betrays our people. He betrays the law, our customs, what it means to be a Jew. We must get rid of him. And Paul's sister heard about this plot. It's interesting. This is the only time we really hear of Paul's relatives. That he has a sister that lived in Jerusalem, and then she sent her son to go and tell Paul, these people who want to kill him. Then when Paul heard this, he told the military guys there in the Antonia fortress. So under military escort at night, they took Paul to Caesarea, from Jerusalem all the way to Caesarea, all the way to the Procurator Felix. Now this procurator, his full name is Marcus Antoninus Felix. He was procurator between 52 to 59, 60 AD. And he grew through the ranks because he was one of the favorites of the Emperor Claudius. But like I said before, he was very unpopular with the Jewish people. He brutally crushed revolts. He hunted down and killed any rebels there might be. And the Roman historian Tacitus also doesn't have nice words to say about him. If we go read in Annals, even the Roman historian says that he thought he could do any evil act with impunity. And Tacitus also says that he exercised the power of a king with the mind of a slave. But anyway, this was this man. He was former slave. He gained his freedom. He grew up the ranks. He was, through the influence of his brother in Rome, and also because he was a favorite of the emperor, he rose to the ranks to become a procurator. And he was sent to Judea to be a procurator there. Not the best place for procurators. It was one of the worst places you could be appointed as a procurator because of all the trouble you had to deal with amongst the local Jewish population. But anyway, Felix, this brutal man, he was sent to Judea to be a procurator at this time. And now, of course, the high priest, they saw Paul already at the trial in Jerusalem, where the Roman guard or the Roman military had to rescue him again. And now he had to travel all the way to Caesarea with a council that accompanied him. I'm sure he wouldn't have been very happy about. So they bring these accusations against Paul. And they make use of this rhetor. He's kind of like an advocate, a lawyer, this fancy speaker who can speak on their behalf, Tertullus. And Tertullus, he brings these accusations against Paul that he was a troublemaker. He's a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he's like a pestilence, spreading a plague of disruption and insurrection. And he also attempted to profane the temple. So they bring these acts against Paul before Felix. And Tertullus also, he says to Felix, well, we appreciate you, what you've done. You brought peace to our nation. Things are stable. Words are flattery. And he's also saying you've accomplished the exact opposite of what Paul wants to do. You bring peace and stability. Look at Paul. He's bringing trouble, and etc. Of course, these accusations were also false. And now Paul speaks in his defense. That is chapter 24, verses 10 to 23. And that's where our Bible passage also fits in. And Paul explains to Felix, the procurator, I've only been in Jerusalem 12 days. And I came here to bring alms. I came here to make sacrifices. I was not teaching anybody. There was no riot that I stirred. There's no evidence of these things that they accuse me of. And actually the people that accuse me of these things, they come from Asia. And they're not even here to make this accusation. So they cannot prove these things against me. And part of Paul's defense also is that they accuse me about the resurrection of Jesus. And because it's resurrection, that is where our text word comes in. Because of the resurrection, Paul says there in verse 16, this being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense toward God and men. So resurrection is a motivation for proper conduct. Because of this hope in this resurrection, we must behave a certain way towards God and towards other human beings. So this is where Paul offers his defense to Felix. And he explains to them, I didn't come to Jerusalem, I didn't cause trouble. And the people, what they accuse me of, they're not even here, those people from Asia. So obviously there were Jews from Asia in Jerusalem. They would have known Paul. Because remember, Paul stayed in Ephesus for a period of around 3 years. So he would have become infamous for his teaching. That Gentiles don't have to convert all the way and become Jews. They don't have to do circumcision. Even Jews themselves don't have to observe food laws, etc. Things like that. So, I mean, for a Jew, that was really would have angered you, because that is what you, a Jew, was about, obedience to the law. But for Paul, these ritual aspects of the law were no longer relevant. So he had a big target on his back. So obviously, at the end of his Nazirite vow, some Jews from Asia recognized him in the temple. They can't stand him. They wanted to kill him. So he was rescued, taken to Caesarea, and they bring these accusations against him. And of course, now Paul speaks in his defense. I wasn't in Jerusalem causing trouble. I was here bringing alms, making sacrifices. And the people that accuse me of these things, they're not even here to speak about the accusations. So, later on, Felix also called Paul several times to speak to him, but he was also intimidated about Paul's message, etc. Luke also tells us he tried to get a bribe out of Paul. And of course, when Felix was gone, Paul was remained incarcerated here in Caesarea for 2 years during the time of Felix, from 57 to 59 AD. And Felix's successor, Festus, there Paul finally appealed to Rome and the emperor. And from there, Paul embarked on this big journey to Rome, where he spent another period of 2 years imprisonment. So yeah, it's Paul. He's giving his defense. I'm not guilty of these things they're accusing me of. Yes, I'm a Christian. And Paul, of course, he upset many Jews by his own lifestyle. He abandoned observing the law. But he's saying there's a hope in the resurrection because of Jesus' resurrection. And because of that, this being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense towards God and men. In other words, because of this future hope in the resurrection, there must be a certain quality of conduct in your life here and now.